We want to equip our customers with tools to turn them into supply chain heroes. That's what we say.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey folks, we're on for a great show at Simply Trade Podcast, and with that, we are going to have a great discussion today. This is actually probably one of my first recordings in a little while, so whenever we publish this, if you hear some stuff in the background or with my system, as we have told everybody, I've been out for a couple of weeks because I have moved to Searcy, Arkansas. So I'm in Central Arkansas from now. With that, we are going to move into a good show today. Lala, why don't you introduce Nicole and bring her on for our initial discussion here?
Well, absolutely. I was... In the past, we've always talked about trying to create or provide for our guests, not our guests, I'm sorry, for our listeners, a show where we talk all things trade. I mean, as a matter of fact, that's kind of the way we wrote up the description of the show is all things trade and logistics and freight forwarding. So we've been a little weak on those last two. So we're hoping that we can catch up and be able to provide a lot more information on or guests that can talk to that. And so today we do have a guest, Nicole Glenn from Candor Expedite. And there's a new division of her business that we'll talk about here in a little bit as well. But we keep on talking about this, and we may sound like a broken record, but this is yet one other person that we met at the TPM 24 conference earlier this year. That was I think that was our first conference. Well, no, that was not my first. That was my second conference of the year, where we went to Long Beach, and it was all things logistics, all things transportation, all things containers and shipping and all that kind of good stuff. And so we met a whole new aspect of the business, let's call it, that we got very interested in and excited about, because it's a whole new world. I mean, it definitely is. If we think trade is big, I mean, gosh, you should go to one of these shows. You're going to really find out how much bigger, I guess, or how much business there is in that. And we were quite impressed, actually. So it was really nice. So we met Nicole, and we started talking. And Nicole's also a fellow podcaster. She does have a show called Ladies Leadership Coalition. So listen in. I've caught a few episodes, and they're really interesting because it talks a lot about women in logistics and the aspect of leadership, as the show indicates, and so how you can bring that into the mix of trade, et cetera. I'm sorry, not trade, logistics. I'm sorry, I'm going to be making that mistake throughout. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, Nicole, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and one of those out of the box guests, I guess you could say. So hopefully we have some good questions that we can dive into.
Well, Andy, being in logistics, that's how you started your career, right, Andy, in logistics? So
I was going to ask you, it's like who on my side, it's like I've been heavily in all aspects of logistics. So it's never a dull moment. How'd you get started, Nicole?
I was 18 years old. So it's almost been 25 years. And it was just by chance. I was working retail, and this guy came in and offered me a job, and I thought he was crazy. And I ended up going to take a look at what the business looked like. And I was like, you know what, let's give it a shot. And so I started, basically, doing all the admin type of work. And then I just have stayed in it. It's one of those things I left for a minute and then pulled me back in. So, I love the space. Usually, I guess you could say it has its, quirks, but it's definitely chaotic and crazy.
Well, I think one of the things that is intriguing in the logistics end of things is it's like I always use the adage of, there's never a dull moment. It's and the other thing is the Forrest Gump effect. It's like life is like a box of chocolates. So is logistics. You never know what you're going to get so you come in for that day. And one of the things I can tell you from a transportation perspective, I came in one day and out of the blue, I was dealing with a situation where we had to have fish and wildlife involved. It was a domestic movement, but it was transporting a very large shark. And I was like, great, this is not going to be. And then the next thing you know is, we had an international situation, animals and all of that is a challenge. We had, pandas and stuff like that we were moving. But I mean, it's just you come in and it's like the next thing you know, we've got a medical emergency and trying to help something out. And a lot of those are exceptions and kind of thing. And then the other side of it is when you come across somebody that's a company that's, challenged with a few things, whatever, and you see opportunities, it's like, you know what? They're reacting to a lot of things day in, day out. They're trying to do too much, quite frankly, themselves, or they're how many times, Nicole, maybe some of your clients, and you go in and you're seeing them and they're almost what I would call cherry picking. They're trying to save a penny here and there on, they're going to do their own transportation and they negotiate, trucking rates. And next thing you know, you got air cargo or rail rates or ocean rates, and they're dealing with all that and they're trying to run around and deal with that. And then you've got your packaging and then you got your warehouse and all that. And it's all fragmented versus coming in and say, step back for a minute. What is it you're trying to do? Are you in business from a logistics perspective, or are you in business to buy and sell your product? And all that. Let the experts help you, come alongside you, and develop and help design your supply chain, kind of a thing. So,
I feel that a lot of people don't look at what time costs. Like, there's so many intangibles too that happen within distribution, manufacturer, that I think they they overlook, obviously, and then things that get swept under the rug, because it can shine light on something that they really don't want to shine the light on or even have the bandwidth to approach, right? So it's one of those things where if you've been in the space long enough and you've kind of seen all these different things that happen, different size of companies, even some of these large companies today they're siloed to like maybe their branch or their location. And so you're dealing with this massive company, but you're also then dealing with almost a small mini business, right? Running within this huge umbrella. And so there's so many different things that you can come across, and it's having that consultative approach to go, okay, let's step back, like you said, Andy, and let's look at this and try to uncover what that is. And so my business is a little different too, because we specialize in the chaos. So Lalo said the name Candor Expedite, and that is exactly what it implies, right? We're dealing with shipments that are short lead, sometimes unplanned. And now, logistics is changing to where the unplanned is becoming a little bit more planned, and then utilizing some different resources to really tailor the strategy of a supply chain. So most of the business that we handle today is going to be like sprinter vans, straight trucks, air freight, domestic air freight. But with that, we're starting to see customers utilizing and tailoring the equipment to fulfill their needs, which is kind of transitioning the first and final mile side of things. But from all of that happening, you have to be able to listen. I think we all agree, no matter what industry you're in, right? What part of the supply chain or trade that you're servicing is listening to what people have as their issues, and then trying to create and get creative with a consultative approach to fix some of those things. So I would love to move a panda though. That's a pretty cool story. Or shark.
That's one of those where it came up, in the window, everybody works on it, whatever. And then, you have a situation where you're going through and they've been working on it. We're going to need to move this from point A to point B and all that. It's like, okay. And the overall concept is approved. And then they're like, okay, we're ready to pull the trigger. And the window, it's like, you've been talking about this for months. And now all of a sudden you're trying to crunch it in here. And the frontline people that have to deal with that is where, it's crunch time. So to your point, the unplanned, that's interesting that you make the comment there. The unplanned becomes planned. Well, you're going to have exception situations. And rather than when it happens and you're going, okay, what do we do and trying to figure it out? It's like, okay, here's how we're going to handle this kind of stuff, and just having a pathway for that so that it's not panic city. It's just a matter of going through the process that you've established, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even having a backup plan for the unplanned is a good plan to have, right? So that way, stepping ahead of it. I used to tell people, because I used to be in sales at one point, and they would go, we don't really have those types of situations of unplanned. And I would always say, well, it's better to know me and not need me than to need me and not know me. So
establishing those relationships ahead of that is so important.
Right. Right. So that makes a big difference when you actually have a backup plan for your unplanned. So,
well, with that, all right. So let's talk a little bit about that. Is in looking at, if somebody from our listenership here is that if they're sitting there going, I am getting a lot of exceptions. It may be once a quarter, maybe once a month, it may be whatever time frame. What do you recommend for somebody to deal with that? Is like, I need to step back and let me just figure out what to do, or is it the types of transportation, or what? How should they deal with that and bring somebody in like yourself to help out in this situation? What information do they need to bring to you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm sure as everyone agrees, the more details you have, the better. I always like to ask for data, because in the expedited space, I always call it like the dirty little secret, right? So if you're working in a company and you're maybe at the top or the operational, leadership level, then you actually have operators and load planners and people that are pulling triggers to get things done. You might not even realize how much unplanned that your company has. And I've seen it too, where they'll move unplanned through the routing guide, and then they have clients that are upset. They have extra, like they're utilizing too much truck for a small amount of product. So I always ask for that data. Like, let's look at what you've been doing with, these types of shipments. They could be smaller types of shipments that maybe a customer needed just 2 pallets and they utilized a regular everyday truckload scenario. So I always want to see what was going on, and then pick apart some of that data and then ask some questions, and then let them ask their teams, hey, what happened in this particular instance? So you can, again, reveal kind of what's happening, get to the root of those things. And then as far as, trying to establish a relationship with an expedited company, I think it's crucial. Again, even if you're doing it once a year, you have something crazy that happens. Maybe especially now with supply chain, maybe something's delayed at port, and now you got to pull some product in from somewhere else for raw materials to keep your production line going, right? So it's one of those things where you should find a company that's trusted. Do some vetting too. I see it being in this space for so long. I see a lot of people go, oh, your job should be easy, dealing with this type of work. And I'm like, how can I start a company like yours? And I'm like, it seems easy because it's really like the unplanned and it's pick up and deliver direct, but there's so many moving parts to it, so understanding what's happening at the pickup end and understanding what's happening at the delivery end, and really taking on all of that responsibility from your customer, because they have 1,000 other things to do. And I think that's where people go wrong. They think, hey, I own or I run a manufacturing type of business. Yeah, that's 1/10, maybe even 1/5 of their day. And so they need to be able to step out of that and then trust the experts. So vet those companies that approach you, and ask for references, make those phone calls and see how this provider has come through for other people. Ask for case studies. So that way, at least you have something to go off of for that unplanned. But if you want to dig deeper, really put that data out there and let a company that has that ability to dive into that to tell you maybe to make some continuous changes will benefit, your entire supply chain domestically, at least, for sure.
Well, and to that point, when you're in a exception type situation, a shipment comes up, it's got to be dealt with. Who cares where it came from? And a lot of times it's, an executive of a company is like, I got to get this to point B. I don't care what you got to do, just get it done, and you're like, oh, great. I got to cut through the company bureaucracy to make this happen. And then come back and go, okay, now what do we got to do? And it's kind of like being the pooper scooper at the end of the parade. It's like, now let me clean it all back up. But as you're going through all of that, and having the ability to have an exception process, if you will, but then also have it to where it's already an approved vendor, and you can send an invoice to the company, you're going to get paid, kind of a thing, is versus like, well, they're not in the system. Well, step back and get all that stuff set up. So again, as we're listening, folks, if you've got situations like that and they're coming up, it may not be every single day, but when it happens, it's going to eat up your time. We'll take, don't just react. Let's respond to this and figure out how to go from this point forward. So then you have the thing, as we were talking a little bit, you've got some cold chain experience here, apparently. And when you're adding, food products or something that has to, biologicals or something that is having to use the cold supply chain type methodologies and for transportation, that just adds a whole nother element to this. It's a problem. But you've got something, I guess, in your company where you've started a cold chain process here. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So really it's one of the reasons why I started my own company. I had this vision because I've been in the food sector or the food industry vertical since 2008. And so I kept seeing a lot of companies come across the concept where it could be a carton of material. It could be a pallet, a couple of boxes. And so I worked at a company that we tried to solve some of this. We went and got some equipment that would, hold the temperature. But there was always these obstacles to overcome. So like super cold product in a refrigerated Sprinter van, it doesn't work. Those pieces of equipment are really designed for just fresh. And so when you come to the frozen side of things or the deep freeze side of things, you're stuck with either a tractor trailer or certain types of packaging, like we were talking about even before we hit go on the show, of like, dry ice, and you have CO2 emissions. And I've had shipments poorly wrapped with dry ice that our driver can't breathe. Literally, the driver could not breathe. We had to go back to the shipper and go, we can't do this. We have to package this differently. So I wanted to come across some sort of solution. And so pandemic, it was like the domestically transportation was a mess. Capacity was terrible. So not only did you have issues when you had short lead shipments, you also had issues even getting capacity for a short lead shipment. And then throw in the refrigerated wrench too. It was like the perfect storm. So we deal with a lot of fast food type of retailers. And I'm like, you know what? Hang tight. There has to be some sort of solution that we can do. And I had been seeking different things for like years, it felt like. But then I partnered with a company that was based in Europe that has been servicing the pharmaceutical side smaller boxes, a 2-liter box, all the way up to a 50-liter box, to hold, samples, specimens, actual pharma materials themselves. And I was like, how can I utilize this packaging and develop it further for the food side? Because obviously pharmaceutical companies, all of that, those movements, pricing and cost of transportation is so minimal when you're talking about the value of the product or ultimately the profits that the pharmaceutical companies make. But food's a different thing, right? We need to maintain costs. We need to actually reduce costs. We're trying to get that to the end consumer. And so, again, partnered with the company and developed a packaging solution that could hold temperature, fresh, frozen, deep freeze for days. And what we have today is a company called Candor Food Chain that has pallet capabilities. So now we can transfer a pallet of -10, a fresh temperature, or even protect from freeze. And the design of the pallet is all panels that we have patented, and those panels hold for 9 days. So we're able to now move product.
Are you kidding me? That is phenomenal.
Yeah. So we're able to move product, and now we're also able to bring that additional layer of flexibility to the supply chain, because a lot of customers have tri-temp materials, right? So they'll have fresh, frozen, and dry. Especially in our retailer side, you have 3 trucks a day constantly disrupting your store. And so we wanted to come together and create solutions that would allow the customer to have that flexibility, right? So on the box side, it's a smaller, it's, up to 50 liters of this box. Those hold about 4 to 5 days. But the pallet is a 9-day hold at fresh or frozen. We can keep that at a -10 temperature. So it's really a game changer to the supply chain, to do that. Because I even had a client the other day. We were kind of walking through their supply chain, and they said to me that they've stopped servicing the West Coast because they're an East Coast company. And they said by the time we break down our pallet, put it in the boxes, dry ice it, air freight it, because the gel packs only last 2 days, we can't charge the consumer anywhere what that cost is. So I was like, well, now you have the option to not break that pallet down, leave it as a pallet, and let's LTL that thing. And let's reduce that cost, and let's get you moving West Coast freight again. And it was, for them, they're like, hey, let's dive into that, because it's even letting companies that have quantity, like order minimums, reduce that. Because they're trying to reserve that space, say on a reefer LTL line or the manufacturing side of it, and they're trying to put order quantities at a 3-pallet minimum. There's a lot of small customers that only need 1 pallet, and so they won't buy from your company because they only need 1, and you have that order minimum because of the transportation side. So now manufacturers can reduce that order minimum. We could put it in a box, we could put it in a pallet. And we can tailor that to what the customer needs. So I love that, because I'm always trying to find that, like we were talking, that consultative approach. What can you do to really change and make a difference for a customer and within their supply chain? And refrigerated has been something that's overlooked for so long. We deal with the same companies, the same issues, the same claims, the same dry ice wrapping. And, it's time to change that. And it's time to come in to create something that actually brings us value and a disruption.
Well, and the cycle times are so vital in that as you're talking through this, I mean, I got to say, if you've got the capability of taking a sub-zero product and on a pallet and it can move for, stay temperature stable for 9 days. Oh my gosh, that's almost unheard of. So that alone is phenomenal. That actually helps from a supply chain. So folks, if you're listening to this, here's one of the things that as we're talking through this, building the relationships with service providers out there, like with Nicole and others, that as you're going through, talking to them on the capabilities. Don't just get stuck to say, just like what Nicole, what you were just saying, it's been the same old thing over and over. And people get into somewhat complacent to say, this is just the way it is. There are advancements in technology and different products and all that. So what that does for you, folks, is if you're looking at planning or engineering, just expose the question to your team and say, can we do something else? Here's where I'm going. You may now have two distribution centers, one to service, let's say, the west side of the country, the other the east side. You might be able to, with extended capabilities, consolidate that into one, and now you can satisfy the whole country. What does that do for you? Well, instead of two operating budgets and all that, you can consolidate it into one. There's things like that. The other is even expanding your distribution center's capabilities beyond its initial radius to say, this is what we can serve. If you're doing with cold supply chain products, my goodness, this would dramatically extend that radius and therefore make you more productive. Well, what does that do? It gives you better job security, get you closer to your customer in a sense where you can provide more product to your customers. You're closer to them, all that. What you're saying right now is just phenomenal. So it's time to maybe look at this and ask the questions again, right?
Right. And that's the concept. We've come across some companies that, they're open to the idea because it's so different, right? You gotta step outside of the norm and look at different solutions. And with this solution, the technology part of it is, we tend to utilize companies that are consolidating and it could be a full truckload. And then, this driver has to stop, 10 times, 15 times to make those deliveries. You're delivering into Texas or Arkansas. You roll up that door, 15 times, that product is getting exposed to that temperature. That's what it's doing. So when you get to the pallet level, Andy, the brand integrity, now you can open that door 50 times and you are keeping the temperature of that particular product the same. So the brand integrity is great. But the other side is we have technology that allows the customer to see where their pallet box is at all times. And what is that temperature as it's
the monitoring capabilities in there? Yeah, I've seen the wireless type things and products and the historical, and that is good stuff for both. The client themselves gives them better assurance. But here's the other thing: it's not if, it's going to be when. There's always going to be some kind of issue. What it is a joint effort to try and say, hey, what can we do to make this better? Gee, I am now approaching that 9th day in this trend. Is there something else we can do with this to make it a little bit better? Do we need to pick it up in the morning instead of the afternoon or in the evenings? Or, their pickup times can make a difference in delivering things and all that. It's like, I'm picking it up and the truck's running out and it's right at rush hour. Well, you know what? Sitting on the road, clock's ticking. So
right, time's money.
Yeah. So there's the other thing. Coming back to that, you mentioned that in early on, the cost of time is in this whole scenario. That's one of the things. I challenge people to say, when you're looking at your supply chain, there's another issue here of if you pick up a product if it gets picked up on a Monday or Tuesday, and it's delivered, let's say on Friday. So if I pick it up on Monday and it's still delivered on Friday, I pick it up on Tuesday and it's still delivered on Friday. Well, would it not make sense to just consolidate that, pick it up on Tuesday and then runs out? Or, things like that. I mean, are there better ways to consolidate your shipping patterns so that now you can take and leverage your buying power, if you will, with a vendor? But you've got to, rather than just letting the process and the operations do its thing, you got to step back and analyze that. Comes back to data. And you ask, it's like, if somebody's coming to you, so I don't even know what questions to ask, but here's my shipping information, or here's my product information. That at least allows you to come in and help somebody rather than a blank sheet and you're trying to do investigative type questions. You already have something to work with.
Yeah. And then understanding, like, how can we even uncover what their customers think? As an expedited company, I have done so many expedited shipments to realize the consignee, the person that the shipper thought that was waiting for that, they closed. They didn't even care that product was expedited in or not, so it's opening that to understand what would my customer's customer need to be successful? And how do we keep reducing that cost and letting my customer get more competitive to increase who they are and what they're trying to build? So yeah, it's all about talking through that and then understanding end goals. And then it's also looking at some of those obstacles and trying to address those, to bring something good to them.
Well, and the thing there is communication, with your end customer and things of that nature. I mean, to your point, I've got a little story to say that kind of illustrates exactly what you were saying. Is now in my past days, I was, at FedEx. Okay. And FedEx is bigger, better, faster, cheaper. Let's go, absolutely positively overnight. And here we go. And there was a container of bolts of fabric that was going to a factory out in California. However it happened, it got misloaded onto the wrong aircraft and wound up in San Antonio, Texas. And of all days for that container to arrive where it did, it just so happened our chief operating officer of FedEx was doing a station visit of all places in San Antonio, Texas.
Sure.
And it was one of the greatest leaders and greatest executives I've ever had the privilege to work for is a man by the name of Jim Barksdale. And Jim calls up and he talks to me, and I was managing our expediting department at the time. So whenever there was something in the wrong place, getting it to the right place. So I have a great appreciation for your company, I can tell you. And the only way we were going to be able to get those bolts of fabric from Texas to California, even in the same day, was I was looking at literally chartering a Learjet and to get out there. And I'm thinking, man, this is going to cost a fortune as we're going through. And by the time I could get it there, it was going to be like 7:00 at night. By the time we landed, offloaded, get it there. And I was talking to the end customer and he said, well, we're going to be closed. I don't need it. He said, I don't really need that till tomorrow anyway. Okay. So I stopped. I've got pressure going. We got to get it there. We got to get it there. And people will have this is like, I wound up working on through the thing to convert the service, had it set up for 2-day delivery, 2-day service. But I said, instead of delivering at the end of the day, I'll make it sure that's the first stop. And it worked out beautifully. The initial customer that shipped with us that was selling the product was very happy because they got a discounted price. And it was a win-win situation. But you've got to look at it from a situation rather than panic city. It's like, take a look at it and it's like, what is the best thing? The end customer is like, you could go jump through hoops, and we were about to, and I was about to spend about $20,000 on an extra aircraft. And most people, I was challenging my senior executive, and at the end of the day, it all worked out really well, but you cannot panic in this. And that's what is so paramount when you have an exception shipment like what you're talking about, having those relationships with your vendor to say, what are my options? What can we do? Because I've got a problem here. And, I don't need to, how many times, I guess, should I say, have you been hit with unrealistic expectations?
Oh, for me? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think of one that kind of cracks me up, and this is almost like a joke. I had a customer, this is a long time ago too, so I'm trying to remember exactly how he said it, but he's like, well, what if we put 3 drivers in the truck? Would it get there? I was like, no, it doesn't get there any faster. And then I've also had a situation where it was like 300 miles away. And he's like, so I told my customer we'd be there in 3 hours. And I'm like, hey, do you drive 100 miles an hour? Like, we have a tractor trailer that has, so that's like all jokes aside. But yeah, I mean, it comes about all the time. And so, our team wants to make everything happen, but I named this company Candor, just for that. Right. So we want to be honest,
upfront to say, this is realistic. Here's blunt, what you're going to get. Right.
Right. And so sometimes it's letting a client know, like, this isn't real. Like, you won't be able to be hitting that threshold. So let's really look at the situation and give you true, accurate types of things. I know a lot of our clients, like when we've worked with them in the beginning, they're always hesitant because they were always overpromised and underdelivered. And, you have to work with the companies that actually do the opposite. And then when something goes wrong, they're standing up to go, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, we had this issue, but here's our resolution. And I just want to let you know that, there's something that we can do here. And how do you feel about that? We can hit go, kind of like what you had done with your customer, when you're at FedEx. It's having that. A lot of companies will hide behind it and not want to tell you what's going on. But you got to fix it, right? You got to fix it and you got to make it right. And because at the end of the day, nothing can be perfect every single time, but it's how the provider reacts to bring you a different solution transparently. I think we all want transparent everything now. It's crucial.
Well, and the ability to have somebody that's going to be able to say, you know what, I trust to stand up against the situation, I guess, and say, you know what, here's what really it's going to come down to, and what you can and cannot get. But well, Nicole, I greatly appreciate what you're having to say. Again, it's as far as looking at this, what would you say again if somebody is saying, I do have some exceptions, whatever, from a planning they're taking? What would be the action that they should take from today's show here?
Well, like we had said, was see what types of companies are out there that can help you be proactive to hit your reactive type of shipments that you have to have. Obviously, contact me. I would love to help you with those types of shipments. But really start just understanding what's happening with your teams. Like when there is an expedited shipment, sometimes again, or that unplanned, talk to your customers, talk to the people who are moving that stuff, and maybe you can avoid a situation that's not required. But start looking at volume and start looking at smaller quantities and start looking at abilities to bring a sustainable option, to your supply chain that will make an impact. So I hope that helps the listeners for sure.
Well, and folks, we're going to have Nicole Glenn's information on our show notes here and whatnot. But this is one where it is so important to don't be afraid to talk to folks that are experts in the industry. They're not going to come in and say, sign a contract right off the bat. It's like, it needs to be a win-win situation here. Can I, as a service provider, do I have the services that you're needing or what? It's going to take some conversation here and go, you know what? I'm not the right one, but I know somebody that is. And it works out that way. But it's, the other thing that I like, and I think I saw in some of this, basically, Nicole, I love your approach where you're looking at ways to make your customer look like a hero. And I love that because it's one of those things to where, in the trenches and whatever, and they come through. And if your customer is successful, then you're going to be successful. And that's
our mission. We literally say that as our mission. So that you said that is so funny. We want to equip our customers with tools to turn them into supply chain heroes. That's what we say.
Well, with that, I thank you so much. Lalo, any comments before we sign off for today?
No, I'm sorry. My computer was having issues, so I didn't collaborate too much. I had to reboot a few times during the recording. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, Nicole. And hopefully we'll see you
Thank you.
And with that, folks, we're going to turn it back over to you. I will say again, keep your eyes open for Lala and I are going to be able to do some more public appearances. If you see us out, then please come by. Talk to us, tell, hey, take a picture with us and whatnot. But we'd love to see you and talk to you. So with that, have a great day, folks.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.